Again, a big welcome to you all. We're delighted to be celebrating Tree Week this year, which is the special year for Green Schools. It's our 25th anniversary. And the biodiversity theme is really delighted to be celebrating and really thankful for the National Parks and Wildlife Service for supporting us. And so today's webinar is called Talking Trees and How They Defend Themselves. So we're going to be looking at how trees can communicate with each other and how they can defend themselves from disease and insects. So as we go along, I'll be asking questions, and if you know the answer, you can pop it in the chat box. So two of my colleagues, Rishiba and Sheila, are here with us, and they will be monitoring the chat box as well. If you do have any questions, we will have time at the end for a Q&A. So feel free to put in your questions into the chat box as well. And I will come back to them at the end, or you can also wait until the last 10 minutes to ask. So somebody stays near the laptop so that you can use that facility. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to start off just by talking a bit about talking and communication and just trying to work out exactly what that means and what are we kind of referring to when we say trees can communicate. Obviously, trees don't speak to each other in the same way that we do, but that doesn't mean that they don't communicate. So let's just try and work out what that word exactly means. So can anybody think of a way to describe what is communication? Or if they look at it another way, how do you do it? How can you communicate with your friend or with anybody? Is there any ways of communicating besides speaking? How can you do that? It's kind of a difficult idea, something kind of you might know, but it's hard to explain. So if anybody has any thoughts, you can put them in the chat box there. I already have some questions coming in. I'll come back to those at the end. And so, yeah, there's a really good answer. So you can communicate with sign language, definitely. So you don't necessarily have to speak. Gestures, symbols, signing, definitely. Body language, very good. Those are all great ways. Movement, yeah, definitely. Texting, yeah. Gestures, script, yeah, you can write it down. Your facial expressions tell a lot. Very good. Braille, yeah, brilliant. These are all great answers. So you're right. So those are all ways of communicating. And basically what you're doing when you're communicating is you're giving a message. You're telling somebody something and they're understanding you. So it doesn't have to be with words. It can be any way of passing on a message. So for example, when you smile at somebody, it might be telling them that you're happy to see them or you're enjoying what you're doing. And you can obviously write things down. Your body language says a lot. You can often tell if someone is annoyed or upset by the way that they're sitting or the way that their face looks. So we communicate in lots and lots of different ways, not just speaking. And that is more the type of communication we'll be looking at today in terms of what trees and plants do. And then we communicate, as humans, we communicate about lots and lots of things. Lots of it is just ways of kind of expressing ourselves or kind of building relationships or chatting, enjoying ourselves and having fun. With trees and plants, it's usually a bit more serious. And it's the same actually for most other animals outside of humans. Communication is usually about things that are really important for survival. And we'll talk more about that later. And then one other thing to just think about is what are the benefits of being able to communicate? So what is a good thing about being able to send messages to someone or receive messages from someone? Do you think, you'd be as happy if you couldn't do that? Anybody think of any things which are helpful or beneficial? So we still have some good answers there that I missed actually. So things like eye contact and lip reading, online messaging are really important ones as well. And online or eye contact is actually a good example of the benefits. So messages coming in there, you can tell how others feel, keeping people company, having fun. So yeah, those are all brilliant answers as well. And to learn new things, definitely you can ask for help. Perfect. Those are great answers. And the first two answers there actually are a lot of kind of ways of communicating that are important to us as people. And the second two might be more things that trees would communicate about. So we'll see the difference as we go on. So sharing your feelings, let someone know you're in danger, definitely. Things that you need, keeping in touch, those are great. Well done, guys. So just going to move on now to focusing then on trees. And specifically, we're looking at not just individual trees, but forests or trees living together. Could be in a small woodland or a large forest. And we're going to look at how they benefit from living together, and how that can impact on their survival, how they might be able to live longer, how they might be healthier. And one of the main reasons why is that they can rely on other trees within that woodland to help them through communication and through receiving actual help from their neighbours. So we're going to look at that in a few different ways in this webinar. So let's talk about talking trees. So what we're going to look at, the main things today are, what are trees and plants communicating about? So what kind of messages are they sharing? And we kind of touched on a lot of them in terms of what people talk about and what we share and chat about. The main things for trees is things that are important for their survival. So it's things like danger, threats to trees, things that they need to give each other warnings about so they can protect themselves. It's also helping each other to find or to directly give each other things like food and water. So those three things are kind of what something needs to survive. It's avoiding danger, it's having enough energy or food, and it's having enough water. And when you're getting help from other trees with that, it is a real benefit. So we're going to start off by looking at, well, what threats do trees actually face? What do they need to defend themselves from? Like, what dangers are there? And then lastly, how do they do it? So we've already said that they don't speak in words, and a lot of the other ways that we communicate, can't make eye contact or send a text or use braille or any of those things. They kind of have their own different systems. So what are they helping each other with? Like I said, it's basically warning each other about threats from insects and herbivores, so things which want to eat them, and then diseases or things that are going to hurt them. So there's lots of different types of diseases and pests that trees can be harmed by or even killed by. And these are very important to kind of warn each other about when they can. And then they also help each other by sharing resources, which is food and water. So we'll start off by looking at the threats or the dangers. So these are the four main dangers which trees face. So the first thing is being eaten. So things which want to come and nibble on them. Anybody tell us what kind of animals might feed on trees? There's a whole range of things which eat trees, and they might eat different parts of the trees. So anybody have an answer of what feeds on trees? You can put them into the chat there. So yeah, weather is another very good one. You're right. Horses eat bark. Yeah, very good. Woodlice, a lot of times they're eating dead wood. Beetles, yeah. Caterpillars, yes. Woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are actually eating insects underneath the bark, but they can definitely be damaging the tree when they do that. Caterpillars are a big one. Very good. Brilliant. So we've got loads of correct answers coming in. And it was really good that some people pointed out what parts of the trees animals eat, because that is kind of crucial. So there's some parts of the tree which are more important for the trees that they don't want to be damaged. So one of the most important parts are leaves, because leaves are where trees soak up the sun, which they need for energy to produce their food. So trees and plants don't really want their leaves being eaten. And the other one is bark, which somebody mentioned. The bark of the tree is really important for their protection and also for passing water up and down and food up and down. So trees really don't want those two parts to be eaten, whereas there are other parts of a tree which is okay for animals to eat from the tree's point of view, which is things like if they have berries or nuts or flowers. So you'll find that a lot of the time trees do want those things to be eaten. So they actually make their berries attractive to animals because they want animals to come and eat the berries. Animals eating berries is actually how a lot of trees spread their seeds and new trees grow. So, for example, if anybody has a rowan tree with the bright red berries, mountain ash, or lots of other trees that have berries, the way that those trees produce new trees is an animal comes along, eats the berry, and the seed goes all the way through the animal and out their other end in their poo, growth, and the seed can then grow into a new tree. Similarly, with seeds, trees are kind of rely on animals that are out collecting seeds, maybe to eat them, but some of them will end up being spread other places that they can grow. And with their flowers, they're relying on things like bees and butterflies to come and pollinate them. So it's kind of some parts of the tree they want animals coming at and feeding on, and other parts they don't. So animals or herbivores are one danger to trees. And then the picture here in the top right-hand corner, what that is showing is the danger of lack of sunlight. So being in the shade, and we kind of said it's helpful to be in a forest, but the drawback of being in a forest is that you're surrounded by other trees, maybe trees that are taller than you or which are blocking your sunlight. And as I said, trees need sunlight to grow. So if anybody was at yesterday's webinar with Sabrina, she spoke about how trees kind of eat air. They're taking in carbon dioxide, but they need sunlight to turn that into their food, which is turn carbon dioxide, water, with the help of sunlight into their sugars, which is what they feed on. So that is a danger to trees, being in the shade. And then our bottom left picture there is supposed to represent disease or infections. And trees can have lots of different types of diseases that affect them. And different trees will be affected by different diseases. So it's kind of the same as us. We're not going to catch a cold from a pet dog because dogs get different types of diseases to people. Same with trees. They're affected by different types of diseases to us. But it's the same types. They can be affected by viruses, fungi, or bacteria. And I wonder, has anyone heard there's a disease in Ireland at the moment that is affecting one of our native trees and it's causing a lot of damage? Has anybody heard of the tree in Ireland at the moment which is being badly affected by disease? Ash tree, yeah, very good. So ash dieback, like you said, is this is a disease that is spreading very rapidly amongst trees in Ireland, and hopefully there are some trees which seem to be able to defend themselves from it, and others which can't. So hopefully in time, the trees that are able to defend themselves will be able to spread and will become a bit more resistant. So we'll talk about how trees fight off infections in a minute. And then this last picture here represents, so people are a danger to trees in some ways because we often put them down to make different things. I'm sure if you look around your classroom now, anybody see anything that is made from a tree? Definitely where I'm sitting, I'm touching several things that are made from a tree right now, because we really rely on timber for a lot of things we use every day. Anybody give an example of something in their classroom right now that is made from a tree? Bet you have loads and loads of things. So yeah, furniture, tables, press stores, pencils, tables, windowsills, books, yeah, so all the paper that you're using, the door. So we really couldn't get through a day without using things from trees. So probably we are a big threat to trees in terms of cutting them down. There's not a lot that trees can do about us. So it's the first three pictures that trees might do to protect themselves, but from humans, they are fairly powerless. So let's get into what they do in response. So trees, one big drawback is that they cannot move, so they can't get away from any type of danger. They have to stay and fight it off. And there are three main ways they use to protect themselves from these dangers. So the first is a physical barrier. The second is a chemical response. And the third is sharing resources. So we'll go through each of these now. So physical barrier, that's kind of the first line of defense for trees. And there is many different types of physical barriers they have. So the biggest one you might think of is their bark or their trunk. And then they have things like thorns and spikes. And also they have a waxy covering on their leaves. So tree bark is really important line defense. It's quite similar to our skin. And think of all of the skin on our body. It is stopping things like disease and insects from getting at kind of the most important parts of us. So it's covering our really important organs. It's covering all of our blood vessels. And so it's like a layer of protection. And tree bark is the same for trees. Different types of trees might have a tougher bark than others, but they all have something. And you'll notice if you go up and feel a tree, feel what its bark is like, some might feel thicker than others, and some might have ridges on it. So they are all different, but they are all doing the same thing, which is surrounding the tree and making a tough or a hard barrier for something to come and either start eating it or a disease kind of gaining entry. And it's really important not to peel the bark off a tree because it's a bit like if you get a cut to your skin, the first thing you would probably do is put a plaster on it because you don't want to get any dirt to get in there or any disease. Trees can't put on a plaster. So if they do have a cut to their bark, it can be quite dangerous. So it's important not to peel off any. And the picture I have here is of a fallen branch of a tree. It's covered in bark. It's a really common Irish tree that a lot of you have it in your schools. And it's a white papery bark. And this is one that a lot of people seem to like. There's like some instinct for us to go and pull that off. Really important not to. Does anybody know what kind of tree that is with this white papery bark? I said it is a native tree. A lot of schools would have it planted in it. And it has quite bendy branches. Birch, very good, yeah. So this is a birch tree and it attracts people pulling at it. So definitely want to avoid that. So that's one line of defense is the bark. There are some animals which will still eat the bark. Usually quite big herbivores are able to do it. And young trees are the most susceptible to that because it's not as tough as older ones. Okay, our next group of protective elements are our thorns, our spikes, our spines, and there's many more names. So these are basically sharp or pointy elements of a tree that are sticking out and trying to just make it harder for animals to get at them. So you probably all know the hawthorn tree, really nice tree. They have very sharp, what we call thorns. So a thorn is a spike that is coming out of the stem or the branch. So it's like part of the branch that is sticking out. Lots of trees might have these. Then we have things like cactus spines. So these are, again, very sharp. So spines are often coming out of the leaves as opposed to out of the branch. And then nettles, not a tree, but a plant, and they have these, they're called trichomes, and they're almost like furry spikes. So they're not as sharp or thick as a thorn, but they can be very sore. And they actually are an example of a physical and a chemical defense, because they have got chemicals in them that kind of make it almost burn or sting, is what we kind of call it. I'm sure anyone that's ever been stung by nettle knows it. And what they're trying to do is stop you, not you probably, but an animal from coming along and eating the leaves. So you notice that these defenses are all around the bark and the leaves. You know, you don't really find flowers or berries that have got spikes coming out of them, because the trees are happy for the animals to eat those. And those are just a few examples. There's loads more different types of thorns out there. And then leaves. So leaves also got a waxy covering to protect them. Some of them are much harder and tougher than others, but they all have it. Our holly leaves there are an example of ones that also have kind of spikes on them. And evergreen leaves are kind of harder or waxier than others. That is more to help them survive the winter. But all leaves do have that hard covering, and it's just making it harder for things like pests to get at, and for small insects to be able to crunch through. So they're, like I said, leaves are one of the most important parts of a plant, which is why they have to really be protected. And young leaves are the most kind of at risk of being eaten, because they don't have that strong waxy covering like the older leaves do. And again, if anybody was on Sabrina's webinar yesterday, she's kind of spoke about this. This is why a lot of insects, young insects, emerge in early spring, because young leaves are just starting to grow and they're an easy target. But things like caterpillars start to appear at the same time that new leaves are just growing on trees, because those are easier for caterpillars to eat. As opposed to older leaves that have that tough covering, it's harder for them to eat. So animals kind of have evolved or grown at the same time as trees. So trees are trying to protect themselves, but animals are trying to kind of get around that as well. Okay, so the next line of defense are chemical defenses. So if something gets through the physical bars, they get through the bark, they get through the waxy covering, they get past the thorns, and plants can still defend themselves. So they have different ways of responding to attack. So they use chemicals to either, if they are infected, they might send chemicals to try and fight that infection, to try and attack the infection. Or what they might do is, if, let's say, one leaf has been infected by a disease, they'll just say, okay, you can have that leaf, and they isolate it. So they kind of almost set up a barrier around that leaf so the infection can't get through, but they kind of don't try and attack the infection, they just let it destroy that one leaf. So that's kind of isolating an infection. They also have chemicals that they kind of will try and use to harm an insect or an animal that's eating it, or that makes them feel a bit sick. So that will encourage the animal to stop eating that leaf or that bit of bark. And then lastly, they can use chemicals to send a warning to nearby plants about that threat. So we'll look at each of those now. So we'll look first at chemicals that they use if something is trying to eat it. So this would be against animals like insects, rabbits, deer, any of those large herbivores. So some plants are capable of releasing poisons or toxins. They don't all affect animals in the same way. So there's some plants that we can't eat that would make us feel sick, but animals can. And that's because animals have been eating them for thousands of years, and their body is able to cope with them, whereas we can't. And what's pretty special about plants is they're able to sense if something is eating it rather than, let's say, a human coming and snapping a branch off. So if a person came and broke a branch in two, a tree will send a chemical designed to help fix that snapping, that damage. Whereas if a deer has come and broken off the end of a branch, the tree will sense that that's what's happening, that it's being eaten, and they will send chemicals to make the branch or the leaves taste bad. And when they are sending chemicals, they don't just send them all over the entire plant, they send them to the areas that they most want to protect. So the areas which are the most valuable to them. So for example, the leaves at the top of the tree, which receive the most sunlight, because they are really important for producing food. Or they might send them to the leaves, which are the youngest and which don't have a strong covering. So there isn't always the same response of where the chemicals are being sent. It might be to a place that they want to protect the most. And these chemicals, they usually are not going to be deadly to the animal that's eating them. They'll just maybe taste bad or sort of burn or sting, or if the animal kept eating it and eating it and eating it, it would eventually get sick. But animals can generally recognize that this is happening and they will stop eating it. So it's not a case that they're going to keep on eating and eating. They kind of know themselves. And when they taste that, oh, I better move on to a different tree or plant. So that's what they do for a herbivore, something eating it. Whereas they kind of have a different reaction if there's an infection. So if there's bacteria, a virus, or fungi. So these are more chemicals that they will send to where they can sense that infection happening. And either they'll send chemicals to fight it, so to try and attack the virus, attack the bacteria, or, like I said, to try and seal off that space. So they kind of will build almost like a wall around where the infection is happening, and let that die off and try and protect the rest of the tree. So sometimes you will see that with a tree that has an infection, that there is sort of one dead area of it, and the rest might still be growing. And then it's other possible response that some trees will do is it will produce chemicals to warn their neighbors that this infection is in the area, so that they should get ready. So when trees send a warning, they can do it in a couple of different ways. So one way is they can send a gas or a pheromone through the air. So it's released out of the leaves of the trees, and it's it's invisible to us. You could be walking past a tree that's releasing this and wouldn't notice, but other trees will sense this. They'll pick up that this is happening, and that will automatically cause them to raise their defenses. And the quicker a tree raises its defenses, the better. Because if you imagine the first tree, let's say there's caterpillars eating their leaves. The tree then notices, oh, there's something eating my leaves. And then one part of the tree the leaves will send a signal to one part of the tree saying, send help. And they'll produce the chemicals and they'll send them to the leaves. And by the time that's happened, the caterpillars could have munched through quite a lot. But if a tree has gotten a warning before the caterpillars have gotten there, they can have sent their chemicals to the leaves already. And once the caterpillars start eating them, they will already have those chemicals there in place. So it's all about time. It's saving time. Now, I'm just going to have a little video here that talks a bit more about this that I'm going to play for you. And this includes ways that both trees and other plants use. So I'll play it for you now.
Plants don't have a separate immune system like animals. Instead, every cell has the ability to detect and defend against invaders. Specialized receptors can recognize molecules that signal the presence of dangerous microbes or insects. In response, the immune system initiates a battery of defensive maneuvers. To prevent more pathogens from making their way inside, the waxy cuticle thickens and cell walls get stronger. Guard cells seal up pores in the leaves. And if microbes are devouring one section of the plant, those cells can self-destruct to quarantine the infection. Compounds toxic to microbes and insects are also produced, often tailor-made for a specific threat. Many of the plant molecules that humans have adopted as drugs, medicines, and seasonings evolved as part of plants' immune systems because they're antimicrobial or insecticidal. An area of a plant under attack can alert other regions using hormones, airborne compounds, or even electrical signals. When other parts of the plant detect these signals, they ramp up production of defensive compounds. And for some species, like tomatoes, this early warning system also alerts their neighbors. Some plants can even recruit allies to adopt a strong offense against their would-be attackers. Cotton plants under siege by caterpillars release a specific cocktail of 10 to 12 chemicals into the air. This mixture attracts parasitic wasps that lay eggs inside the caterpillars. Plants may not be able to flee the scene of an attack or fight off predators with teeth and claws, but with sturdy armor, a well-stocked chemical arsenal, a neighborhood watch, and cross-species alliances, a plant isn't always an easy meal. Did you know there's a TED-Ed coloring competition?
Good, so that's just to give you a bit of an idea there of what
Once a month.
Talking about. So I was going to give you a specific example of a tree and how this works with giraffes. So there's a tree called acacia trees, which giraffes love to eat. And giraffes are, a huge animal, huge herbivore, and they can eat a huge amount of leaves in one go, in one sitting. So a tree could be almost completely eaten of all its leaves without any defenses. So what an acacia tree does is when it senses a giraffe beginning to eat it, it produces a gas, ethylene gas, and it releases that out. And this gas can travel about 100 meters away. And any of the other trees around there in that 100-meter kind of radius, if they sense this gas, they begin to produce these chemicals, sending them into all of their leaves and stems. And this chemical, if a giraffe eats it, will begin to make it feel sick. Now, giraffes have always eaten acacia trees for thousands of years, so they've gotten used to this happening. So if a giraffe is feeding on one tree and it's finished, it won't go to the next tree beside it. It will walk over 100 meters away, past lots and lots of other trees, before it begins eating again. And this is because it's like it knows all of the trees that are near that tree will have those chemicals in it that will make it sick. And it doesn't want to eat those. So it goes further and further away before it begins eating another tree.
Just leave it on for 5 more minutes.
In this way, they're protecting their neighbors. So trees that are living near each other are protected by this chemical signaling. That's just one example, and it's quite a nice one. Now, this is only one way that trees send signals, and actually the main way they send signals is completely different. It's not through the air at all. They use a different part of the tree to send these signals and these messages and to share their resources. All happens in a different way to what we've been speaking about. Does anybody know what part of a tree is used to do most of the communicating with other trees? So it's not its leaves, it's a different part altogether. Does anybody have any guesses of what that might be? Yeah, so we got a few right answers coming in. So it's the roots. So the roots of the trees are actually the most important part for communicating. With a lot of other plants, it can be through the air, but what's great about trees is that they have very large and deep roots, and that helps them to set up or to be part of something called the wood wide web. So the wood wide web is a nickname that's given to an underground kind of network that connects different trees in the forest. And what is actually happening under the ground is that the roots of one tree are joined to the roots of another by a network of fungi. So things that are, mushrooms are one type of fungi. These are different types which have long, stringy parts to them, and they can have huge amounts of these strings or these networks that are joining different roots of trees together. And it's this kind of network that passes most of the messages and all of the resources like water and food between trees in a forest. So again, I have a really quick video here that will explain this and show you some images of what it's like.
Trees may look like solitary individuals, but the ground beneath our feet tells a different story. Trees are secretly talking, trading, and waging war on one another. They do this using a network of fungi that grow around and inside their roots. The fungi provide the trees with nutrients, and in return they receive sugars. But scientists have found this connection runs far deeper than first thought. By plugging into the fungal network, trees can share resources with each other. The system has been nicknamed the Wood Wide Web. It's thought that older trees, fondly known as mother trees, use this fungal network to supply shaded seedlings with sugars, giving them a better chance of survival. Those trees that are sick or dying may dump their resources into the network, which might then be used by healthier neighbours. Plants also use fungi to send messages to one another. If they're attacked, they can release chemical signals through their roots, which can warn their neighbours to raise their defences. But like our internet, the Wood Wide Web has its dark side too. Some orchids hack the system to steal resources from nearby trees. And other species, like the black walnut, spread toxic chemicals through the network to sabotage their rivals. Arboreal cybercrime aside, scientists are still debating why plants seem to behave in such an altruistic way. The hidden network creates a thriving community between individuals. When you're next in woodland, you might like to think of trees as part of a big superorganism, chatting and swapping information and food under your feet.
So that's just a nice video to give you kind of an idea of what it actually looks like under the ground. So the network of fungi, because it is huge, really, really huge, and it connects a huge amount of trees together. And trees are able to send chemicals, hormones, and even electrical signals along it. And just to give you an idea of just how many little tiny filaments or fibers of the network there are. If you took one spoonful of soil in a woodland, there might be several kilometers worth of the fungi within this. So they obviously are tiny, 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 but they are joining into all the different roots of one tree possibly and the roots of several others. So you can imagine that it's very difficult to map this out exactly because there are so many connections. And they're all kind of on top of each other and intertwined and linked to lots of different places. And so scientists are really only beginning to study this and be able to learn more about it. So one thing mentioned in the video there is that there's this idea of mother trees or hub trees. And these are often the tallest or the oldest trees in the forest. And these are really important trees in terms of sharing resources with others. So if you imagine an older tree or a taller tree, because it is taller, it will have more access to the sun, it will have more sunlight on the tops of its leaves. And this allows them to make lots of food, and they might not need all of it. So they will be able to release some of that through their roots, through the fungi, and into the next tree, which maybe is in the shade and it can't make its own food. And also older trees tend to have a bigger root system. So their roots might go down further and spread wider than other trees. And because of that, they might be able to access more water because they can reach further. And they can then make this water accessible to other trees. So they might bring the water up to a different level that other trees can then reach. And another interesting thing that scientists are studying is, are trees more likely to share resources with their family members? So, trees don't really have families in the exact same way as us, but they can be related. So maybe the seed from one tree fell on the floor on the ground, and then another tree grew from it. So they would be sort of related. And there is, scientists are looking into it. Are they more likely to share resources with those family members? Can they tell if a tree is related to them? And there is often, there is some evidence that trees are more likely to share resources with other trees of the same species. So an oak tree might share resources with another oak tree, but maybe not with a hazel tree. But sometimes they do that. So they might share them with any tree in their area, so any of their neighbors. But this is all very, very new and kind of an exciting area that scientists are learning about. And they're trying to work out, well, why does this happen? Are trees just really nice? Do they just want to help their neighbors? So basically, most of these interactions or these things that are happening are almost automatic. It's like a chain reaction, but it is helpful for kind of everyone taking part. So the trees are getting additional help from their neighbors, and the fungi are taking some of the sugars when they're passing it along. So they're not just passing the extra food from one tree to the next, they take some of it for themselves to help them to grow. And it can be helpful, like we said, for trees to be living with each other because they have this warning system. So maybe it is good for them to have lots of other healthy trees around them. And there's also not really any downside to it. So if a big tree has all of this extra food because they have all of this extra sunlight, there's no harm to them to release it into the system. And they only need so much to grow. So there's no kind of downside to it. But yeah, the question some scientists are arguing about is, are they trying to help each other? Why are they sharing messages? Why are they sharing resources? Some scientists might look at it as they're helping each other, they're a community, they're a group, and others might say no, it's just kind of chance that it's happening. So it's a really interesting area, something that we're learning more and more about as we go on. But we can see that trees do seem to act in ways that help the entire group. So it's pretty, I think it's really interesting. And it's, next time you're out in the forest, it might be a nice thing to have a look and think, what is going on underneath the ground? Is there messages being passed? Is there food being passed? And what exactly is going on? So that's everything from me, guys. Thanks a million for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And if anybody has any questions, you can pop them in the chat box, and I'll do my best to answer them. I think I saw a question at the very beginning, which asked how long a tree can live for. And that's a really good question. Depends on the tree, what type of tree it is. Some trees tend to live longer than others. So for example, yew trees are a tree which has very long lives. And then other trees tend to have shorter lives. It does obviously depend if they're infected with a disease or they don't have enough sun, then they won't live for very long. In Ireland, the oldest trees we have are about 800 years old. There's 3 trees which we think are about 800 years old, but we don't, that's pretty unusual. But many trees would live to be over 100 years old if they're in the right place. And there is trees outside of Ireland that will be over 1,000 years old. So yeah, really good question, but it does really depend. So someone else has asked, how deep under the ground can roots go? Again, it depends on the tree. So as trees grow taller, their roots continue to grow, but they don't keep going deeper and deeper underground. They actually spread out wider, because if you keep going deeper underground, you just come to hard rock, and roots can't get through that. So they will only go down a certain amount, and then they start going out wider as opposed to deeper.
There are a few older ones there, Claire, like the sap that was early. How does sap benefit trees?
That's a great question. Again, different trees will have kind of different types of sap. Sometimes it can be healing, like a sablon. It's not really like, I see someone else asking there, is it like blood? No, there is trees do have something that's kind of like our blood vessels. So, you know, all throughout our bodies, we have blood vessels that move our blood, which has like oxygen and food and sugars and things in it. Trees do have a system like that, but it's not the sap. It's like inside the shoots. It's like little kind of tubes that bring it up and down and around. See someone's asked there, how wide can a tree grow? That's another good question. And actually the trees that on average grow 2.5 centimeters wider every year. So the wider a tree is, the older it is. So I always say, if you try and hug a tree, and if your fingers touch after you hug it, then that tells you it's less than 25 years old. And if it takes 2 people trying to hug it, then it's probably about 50. So they're growing wider and wider every single year. And someone just asked there, is it possible to tell the age of a tree without cutting it down? So yes, you can roughly work it out by measuring, get a measuring tape, measure how wide the trunk is, and then divide your answer by 2.5. They grow 2.5 centimeters wider each year. That's not an exact answer, because they might grow more or less in a year, depending on how much sunlight they have, etc. But it gives you a rough answer. So for, like I said there, that there's 3 trees that are about 800 years old. We don't have the exact age. Scientists can get an exact age by kind of taking a bit out from inside the tree, but it can damage them. And actually there's a story where there was a scientist that they were in, I think it was in America, and they're trying to date how old some trees were, and they just picked one random tree, and where they were using this instrument. It's kind of like a drill that goes into the tree, and it didn't really work. It kept getting stuck, and they eventually cut down the tree rather than keeping on doing that. And they found out the tree was like over 1,000 years old, and they hadn't realized, and they just destroyed this amazing tree. So you kind of can work it out without cutting it down, but it's difficult. How many types of native trees do we have in Ireland? Great question. We have about 20 different native trees. You can get, I'll actually share a link in the chat from that shows all of the different types of trees. I'll do that at the end if you want to hang on. What is the most common type of tree in Ireland and in the world? I don't know about in the world, but the most common tree in Ireland is the Sitka spruce, which is a bit like a Christmas tree. It's a pine tree, and they're the most common because they are planted for forestry. So they're planted in order to be cut down and then used for like paper and furniture and things. So they grow really quickly, and that's why they are planted the most. How tall can a tree grow, and what are the tallest types of trees? It depends on the tree, how tall they can grow. in Ireland, one of the tallest, like ash tree would be one of the tallest, and Scots pine, they might grow 40 meters tall, which is very tall. But other trees, like apple trees, and hazel trees, they kind of will only grow 10 or 15 meters. So they don't grow that tall, no matter how old they get. They just keep getting wider. If you cut off most of or all of the branches of a tree, will it die? If you cut off most of them, it probably will. You can cut off some branches without harming it. Some people, if they're growing a hedge, will cut off the branches kind of up higher and let the lower ones grow in together. You just have to have enough leaves left for the tree to produce its own food. But so it's okay to cut down a branch, for example, if it's in the way, like if maybe if you have a walkway and there's a tree there and the branch is like right sticking out at your head, it's okay to cut off a branch or two. There's loads of brilliant questions here, guys. I know we're kind of towards the end of the session. Most people have to leave, and that's fine. Thanks for everyone's coming. I'll just answer a few more, but if it's coming up to your break or whatever, you can head off.
There were a couple about the mother trees. How do they know? And are they, I think there were two kind of related, so you might get them with one. What type of trees are usually the mothers? Or are they all eventually? And how does it know to kind of share? Where was that? Mother tree. Sorry, why do the mother do we know why the mother trees help the seedlings? So they were kind of related there.
Yeah, we don't really know why. There's like different suggestions from scientists, but it's kind of hard to work out exactly why anything does anything. It's going to say, why does a person do something? We don't know. We can kind of guess. Sometimes it is that the mother tree is the mother of their own, for example, an oak tree, its acorns grow into new oak trees, and a lot of times they're just right beneath her. So, or him, a mother tree doesn't have to be a female. It can also be, most trees aren't really male or female. Some are, like holly, you might have a male or female. But not all trees will become mother trees. Older trees, some trees are more likely to survive into older age, like oak trees. A lot of times oak trees live quite old, and I think of them as being quite wise. They might be a mother tree, but they can be different types depending on how old of an age that they live to. And yeah, I can't tell you the exact reason why they do it. I like to think that, yeah, they're trying to help, but it might just be an automatic reaction. We don't know. And I might just finish with this one. What's your favorite type of tree? Great question. Yeah. My favorite is probably the silver birch tree. And I actually have silver birch growing in green just opposite my window here, so I can see them every day. I really like the white papery bark. It's just a bit different. They have lovely seeds that are like confetti. If you touch their seeds in autumn, they all just kind of sprinkle off into the wind, and they have kind of cool bendy branches. So they're my favorite one. Thanks a million, everybody. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day and have a very happy tree week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.